The gunshot that rang out across Yuma's dusty Main Street in the summer of 1878 was not what changed Eleanor Louise's life, though it sent everyone else diving for cover behind water troughs and hitching posts. What changed everything was the moment she stood frozen in the middle of the street, her basket of carefully selected vegetables scattered at her feet, and met the eyes of the man who had fired that warning shot into the air to stop a runaway wagon before it trampled her where she stood. Eleanor had been 20 years old for exactly 3 weeks, and in those 3 weeks, nothing particularly remarkable had happened except Mrs. Henderson at the general store had made another cutting remark about how all those freckles made Eleanor look like she had been standing too close when someone shook out a dirty rug. The other women in the store had laughed, their eyes sliding away from Eleanor's face with that particular mix of pity and relief that they were not the ones being mocked. Eleanor had learned long ago to keep her chin up and her expression neutral when such comments came, which they did with depressing regularity in this small Arizona town where she had lived for the past 5 years. The cowboy lowered his smoking revolver and walked toward her with long, easy strides that suggested a man comfortable in his own skin. He was tall, with sun-darkened features and eyes the color of strong coffee, and when he reached down to help gather her scattered vegetables, Eleanor noticed his hands were calloused but gentle as he picked up the tomatoes she had spent 10 minutes selecting. "You all right, miss?" His voice was low and carried a slight drawl that suggested Texas origins. "I am fine, thank you." Eleanor kept her eyes down, reaching for a potato that had rolled near his boot. "I should have been paying more attention. That wagon should have been under control. Driver was drunk." He stood, holding out her basket now filled with the rescued produce. "Could have been a lot worse if you had gotten hurt." Eleanor took the basket, finally looking up at him fully. She expected to see his gaze flicker over her face with that familiar expression of barely concealed distaste or amusement. Instead, his eyes simply met hers with straightforward kindness. "Thank you for your quick thinking," she said quietly. "Just doing what anyone would do." He touched the brim of his hat. "Name is Nathan Kane. I am working at the Double Creek Ranch about 5 miles east of here. Eleanor Larson." She shifted the basket to her hip. "I work at the boarding house on 3rd Street. Before Nathan could respond, a sharp voice cut through the dispersing crowd. "Eleanor, what are you doing standing there chattering? Mrs. Morrison needs those vegetables for supper, and you are wasting time as usual." Eleanor felt her cheeks flush, which only made her freckles stand out more prominently against her pale skin. The woman striding toward them was Constance Hart, the boarding house owner's daughter, who had made it her personal mission to remind Eleanor daily of her place in the household hierarchy. "I was nearly run down by a wagon, Constance. This gentleman prevented a serious accident." Constance's eyes swept over Nathan with practiced assessment, lingering on his dusty but well-made clothing and the quality of his gun belt. "How fortunate. I am sure Eleanor is very grateful, Mr. Kane, Nathan Kane." His tone had cooled noticeably. "And I am sure Miss Larson needs to get those vegetables back before they spoil in this heat. Good day, ladies." He tipped his hat again, but his eyes were on Eleanor, not Constance, and then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd with the same easy confidence he had displayed when walking toward danger. Constance grabbed Eleanor's arm with unnecessary force. "You will not get ideas above your station just because some ranch hand played hero. Now hurry up before Mother has both our hides." The boarding house was a large, 2-story structure that had seen better days, but maintained a reputation for cleanliness and decent food. Eleanor had been working there since she was 15, when her parents had died of fever during their first summer in Arizona Territory. They had come west seeking opportunity and a fresh start, leaving behind the Pennsylvania coal town where Eleanor's father had worked himself to exhaustion. Instead, they had found harsh desert heat, illness, and early graves in the Yuma cemetery. Mrs. Morrison, the boarding house owner, had taken Eleanor in more out of need for cheap labor than charity. Eleanor worked from dawn until well past dark most days, cooking, cleaning, serving meals, and doing whatever else was required. In exchange, she received a narrow room under the eaves, basic meals, and a small wage that she carefully saved in a tin box hidden beneath a loose floorboard. That evening, as Eleanor served beef stew and cornbread to the dozen men who boarded at the house, she found her thoughts drifting back to those few moments in the street. Nathan Kane had looked at her like she was a person worth seeing, not just a collection of unfortunate physical features to be remarked upon. It was such a simple thing, and yet it had been so rare in her experience that she turned it over in her mind like a prospector examining a particularly interesting stone. "More stew here, girl." One of the boarders, a freight company supervisor named Horace Gibbons, banged his spoon against his bowl. "And try not to slop it everywhere like you did last time." Eleanor bit back a retort and moved to refill his bowl. The dining room was hot and close despite the open windows, and her dress stuck to her back with perspiration. As she moved around the table, she caught snippets of conversation about water rights disputes, mining claims, and the usual complaints about the heat. It was the same every night, the same faces saying the same things, and Eleanor felt the familiar weight of her circumstances settle over her shoulders like a too heavy shawl. After the dishes were washed and put away, after the kitchen was scrubbed and the dining room swept after Mrs. Morrison had conducted her nightly inspection and found 3 things to criticize, Eleanor finally climbed the narrow stairs to her room. It was barely large enough for a cot, a small trunk, and a washstand, but it was hers. She lit the stub of a candle, changed into her nightgown, and sat on the edge of the cot to count the money in her tin box. $27.35. 5 years of saving, of doing without, of carefully hoarding every penny she could spare. It was not nearly enough to start over somewhere else, to find a place where she might have a chance at something more than serving other people's meals and scrubbing other people's floors. Eleanor replaced the money and slid the box back into its hiding place, then lay down on the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling. She thought about Nathan Kane's eyes, steady and kind, and the way he had not looked away from her face. She thought about how foolish it was to dwell on a brief encounter with a stranger she would likely never see again. Then she blew out the candle and tried to sleep, despite the heat. Saturday arrived with the particular brightness that Arizona summer mornings possessed, the sky so blue it almost hurt to look at it. Eleanor had one afternoon off per week, and she used it to walk to the small cemetery on the outskirts of town where her parents were buried. It was not much, just 2 wooden crosses and a patch of ground she tried to keep clear of weeds, but it was the only place in Yuma that felt like it belonged to her in any meaningful way. She was kneeling in the dirt, pulling up the stubborn desert growth that seemed to appear overnight when she heard footsteps behind her. Eleanor turned, shading her eyes against the sun, and was startled to see Nathan Kane standing a respectful distance away, his hat in his hands. "Miss Larson, I apologize for disturbing you. I was visiting my brother's grave and saw you here." Eleanor got to her feet, brushing dirt from her skirt. "Your brother is buried here." "Yes, madam, Jacob Kane. He died 2 years ago when a horse rolled on him." Nathan's expression was somber. "He was working at the Double Creek when it happened. I came to Yuma to settle his affairs and ended up staying. Boss needed experienced hands, and I needed a reason not to drift. I am sorry for your loss. Eleanor meant it. She knew grief, knew how it could anchor you to a place even when logic suggested you should leave. Nathan replaced his hat and gestured at the crosses. Your folks? Yes. They died 5 years ago, just a few months after we arrived in Arizona. Fever took them both within a week of each other. The old pain was still there, but duller now, like a scar that ached in certain weather. That is hard. You have other family? No one. It has just been me since then. Eleanor turned back to finish pulling the weeds, suddenly self-conscious about this conversation. Men did not usually seek her out for casual talk, and she was not sure what to make of it. Nathan crouched down and began helping with the weeds without asking permission. His hands moved efficiently, and they worked in companionable silence for a few minutes before he spoke again. I meant what I said the other day, about anyone doing what I did, but I am glad I was there. So am I. Eleanor sat back on her heels, looking at him directly. Most people would have let me fend for myself. I am not exactly the kind of person folks go out of their way to help. Why do you say that? The question was so genuinely curious that Eleanor almost laughed. You have eyes, Mr. Kane. I am not blind to what I look like. Nathan studied her for a long moment, his head tilted slightly as if considering something. You know what I see when I look at you, Miss Larson. Eleanor braced herself for whatever polite lie or awkward deflection was coming. What? You look like a sunset. The words hit her with unexpected force. Not because they were particularly poetic, but because they were said with such simple sincerity, as if he was merely stating an obvious fact. I do not understand, Eleanor said slowly. Your hair. Nathan gestured vaguely. It is the color of the sky when the sun goes down over the desert. All those shades of red and copper and gold mixed together. And your freckles are like the first stars coming out. I have always thought sunsets were just about the most beautiful thing a person could see out here. He paused. I am not much good with words, but that is the truth of it. Eleanor felt something crack open in her chest, something she had kept carefully sealed for so long that she had almost forgotten it was there. People have been mocking my hair and freckles since I was a child. I have heard every cruel comparison you can imagine. Then people are damned fools. Nathan's voice was matter of fact. Pardon my language, but it is the truth. You are a beautiful woman, Miss Larson, and anyone who says different needs their eyes examined. She did not know what to say to that. All the words seemed to have fled from her mind, leaving only a strange, fragile hope that she was afraid to acknowledge. They finished tending the graves in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now, charged with something Eleanor could not quite name. When they were done, Nathan walked her back toward town, keeping a respectful distance but clearly intending to see her safely home. They talked about small things along the way, carefully avoiding anything too personal. He told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the year he spent trailing cattle north to Kansas. She told him about Pennsylvania winters, about her father's dreams of a better life, about the strange beauty of the desert that she had slowly learned to appreciate. As they reached the boarding house, Nathan paused. Miss Larson, I wonder if I might call on you sometime. Properly, I mean. If that would be acceptable to you. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. I do not have much free time. Mrs. Morrison keeps me quite busy. I understand. But maybe when you do have time, we could take a walk or have supper somewhere. I would like to know you better if you are willing. Yes, Eleanor said before she could think better of it. Yes, I would like that. Nathan's smile transformed his entire face, lighting it up with genuine pleasure. Saturday next week. I could meet you after your cemetery visit if that suits. That suits fine. He tipped his hat, still smiling, and Eleanor watched him walk away before turning to face the boarding house. Constance was visible in the front window, her expression sour as vinegar. Eleanor squared her shoulders and went inside, prepared for whatever venom was about to come her way. Consorting with cowboys now, Constance's voice dripped with disdain. Does Mother know you are meeting men in secret? I was tending my parents' graves. Mr. Kane happened to be visiting his brother's grave at the same cemetery. There was nothing secret about it. You were walking with him through town for everyone to see. Do you want people to think you are that kind of woman? Eleanor felt her temper flare, hot and bright. What kind of woman? The kind who has a polite conversation with a respectful man. Or are you just upset that someone showed interest in me instead of you for once? Constance's face flushed an ugly red. How dare you speak to me that way? Mother will hear about this. Then go tell her. I have done nothing wrong and we both know it. Eleanor pushed past her and headed for the kitchen, where Mrs. Morrison was inventorying supplies. The older woman looked up with her perpetual expression of dissatisfaction. What is all this shouting about? Your daughter is upset because I walked through town with a gentleman who helped me tend my parents' graves. Apparently, this is somehow scandalous. Mrs. Morrison's eyes narrowed. Watch your tone, girl. You are not indispensable here, no matter what you might think. There are plenty of women who would be grateful for your position. Yes, madam. Eleanor forced the words out through gritted teeth. Is there anything you need me to do before I start preparing supper? The rooms on the second floor need fresh linens. And make sure you do not just throw the sheets on the beds like last time. I want proper hospital corners. Eleanor spent the rest of the afternoon hauling sheets and blankets up and down stairs, making and remaking beds until Mrs. Morrison was satisfied with the corners. By the time she started on supper preparations, her back ached and her hands were raw from the harsh lye soap, but she could not quite suppress the small flame of happiness burning in her chest. Nathan Kane thought she looked like a sunset. Nathan Kane wanted to call on her properly. It seemed impossible, like something that happened to other women in other places, not to red-haired, freckled Eleanor Larson in dusty Yuma, Arizona territory. The week that followed was simultaneously the longest and shortest of Eleanor's life. She went through her daily routines in a kind of daze, her mind constantly drifting to that upcoming Saturday. Mrs. Morrison noticed her distraction and increased the criticism accordingly, as if trying to remind Eleanor of her place through sheer force of disapproval. Constance made several pointed comments about cowboy wages, and what kind of future a woman could expect with a ranch hand. Eleanor ignored them both as best she could. She had learned long ago that responding only gave them more ammunition, and she was not about to let their bitterness poison this fragile, new thing growing in her heart. On Wednesday evening, one of the regular boarders, a middle-aged bank clerk named Theodore Walsh, lingered after supper while Eleanor was clearing the table. Miss Larson, I was wondering if I might have a word with you. Eleanor glanced toward the kitchen, where she could hear Mrs. Morrison clattering dishes. Of course, Mr. Walsh. What can I do for you? I have been meaning to speak with you for some time now. Theodore cleared his throat nervously. I am a man of steady employment and decent prospects. I own my house outright and I have savings set aside. What I lack is a wife to help manage my household and provide companionship. Eleanor's stomach sank as she realized where this was heading. Mr. Walsh, please, let me finish. I know I am not a young man, and I know you are a young woman with limited prospects. But I believe we could come to a mutually beneficial arrangement. You would have security in a home of your own. I would have a wife who understands the value of hard work. I am not asking for a love match, just a practical partnership. He said it all so reasonably, as if he was proposing a business transaction rather than a marriage. And in a sense, Eleanor supposed he was. This was what her life had come down to, she thought with a flash of bitter clarity. At 20 years old, she was already being offered practical partnerships by middle-aged bank clerks who saw her as a solution to their housekeeping problems. "Mr. Walsh, I am flattered by your offer, but I must decline. I am not looking to marry at present." Theodore's expression hardened slightly. "You should think carefully before refusing, Miss Larson. A woman in your position does not get many offers, and I have heard rumors that you are keeping company with some cowboy. I can assure you that will lead nowhere. Men like that do not marry women like you. They dally and move on." The words stung precisely because Eleanor had been thinking the same thing in her darker moments. What did Nathan Kane really want with her? Why would a man who could have his pick of prettier, wealthier women be interested in the hired help at a boarding house? Nevertheless, my answer is no. Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to finish. She escaped to the kitchen before Theodore could argue further, her hands shaking slightly as she began washing dishes. Mrs. Morrison appeared at her elbow, eyes sharp with calculation. "Theodore Walsh is a good man with steady income. You could do much worse. You were listening." "It is my house. I can listen to whatever I please, and I am telling you that you are a fool if you turn down a solid offer like that for some flight of fancy with a cowboy." Eleanor scrubbed a plate with more force than necessary. "It is my decision to make." "Yes, and you will make the wrong one because you are young and stupid. But do not come crying to me when your cowboy rides off to greener pastures and you are left with nothing." The words echoed in Eleanor's head as she finished the evening chores and climbed to her narrow room. She sat on the cot and pulled out her tin box, counting the money again as if the total might have magically increased. $27.35. Not enough to start over. Barely enough to survive for a few months if she was careful. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was being foolish. Maybe she should accept Theodore Walsh's practical partnership and resign herself to a life of managing someone else's household instead of serving in one. At least she would have a home of her own, such as it was. But then she thought about Nathan's eyes, steady and kind, and the way he had said she looked like a sunset. She thought about how he had helped tend her parents' graves without being asked, and how he had walked her home like she was someone worth protecting. And she decided that even if it was foolish, even if it led nowhere, she wanted to see where this fragile new thing might go. Saturday arrived with a brilliant sunrise that painted the desert in shades of gold and amber. Eleanor completed her morning chores with unusual efficiency, earning a suspicious look from Mrs. Morrison but no comment. After lunch, she changed into her best dress, a simple green cotton that she had carefully mended and pressed the night before. She pinned her hair up carefully, studying herself in the small, cracked mirror on her wall. Her reflection showed her what it always did. Red hair that refused to lie smooth, a face scattered with freckles, eyes that were an unremarkable hazel. But maybe, Eleanor thought tentatively, maybe she did not have to see herself through other people's eyes anymore. Maybe she could try seeing herself the way Nathan apparently did. The thought was radical enough to make her pause with her hand on the doorknob. What would it be like to move through the world believing she was worth something? To walk with her head up not in defiance but in genuine confidence. She was not sure she knew how, but maybe she could learn. The cemetery was quiet when she arrived, baking in the afternoon heat. Eleanor tended her parents' graves quickly, speaking to them quietly as she worked. She told them about Nathan, about his kindness and his words, about this chance at something more than survival. She wished desperately that they were alive to advise her, to help her navigate this unfamiliar territory. "Eleanor, She turned to find Nathan approaching, and her breath caught slightly. He was cleaned up, wearing what were clearly his good clothes, his hair still damp from washing. He looked nervous, she realized, which somehow made her feel better about her own churning stomach. "Nathan, hello. You look lovely." He said it simply, stating a fact, and Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself." He grinned at that, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "I figure I should make a good impression on a proper first outing. I thought maybe we could walk down to the river. There is usually a breeze there, and I packed us some food if you are hungry." The next few hours were among the best Eleanor had ever experienced. They walked along the Colorado River, finding a spot in the shade of some cottonwood trees where Nathan spread out a blanket and unpacked cold chicken, bread, cheese, and some slightly squashed peaches. They ate and talked, the conversation flowing easily from topic to topic. Nathan told her about his childhood in Texas, about his mother who had died when he was young and his father who had drunk himself to death not long after. He and Jacob had raised themselves mostly, working ranches and learning their trade from older cowboys who took pity on them. Jacob had been the steady one, Nathan said, the brother who made plans and thought about the future. Nathan had been the wild one, always ready to ride off to the next adventure. "Jacob's death changed me," Nathan said quietly, staring out at the river. "Made me realize that life is shorter than we think and running does not solve anything. He wanted to settle down, buy his own spread someday." I thought he was crazy, but now I understand what he meant. It is not about giving up on adventure. It is about building something that matters. "Is that what you want? Your own ranch? Someday, maybe. Right now I am content working at the Double Creek and saving my wages. Boss is fair, work is steady, and I am learning the business side of things. But yes, eventually I would like to have something of my own. A small place, nothing fancy. Just enough land for a decent herd and a house that does not leak when it rains." Eleanor listened, trying to imagine what that kind of life would be like. She had never thought much beyond survival, beyond the next day's work and the next small addition to her savings. The idea of planning for a future that included land and cattle and a real home seemed almost fantastical. "What about you?" Nathan asked. "What do you want, Eleanor?" It was the first time he had used her given name, and she liked the sound of it in his low voice. "I do not know. I have spent so long just trying to get by that I never really thought about what comes next. I save money, but I am not even sure what I am saving for anymore. Maybe enough to leave Yuma and start over somewhere else. Maybe enough to never have to depend on someone like Mrs. Morrison again. You deserve better than that boarding house. Better than scrubbing floors and taking grief from people who should know better. Perhaps, but wanting better and getting better are two different things." Nathan shifted to face her more fully. "Can I be honest with you about something?" Eleanor nodded, her heart suddenly beating faster. "I have not been able to stop thinking about you since that day with the wagon. And it is not just because you are beautiful, though you are. It is because when you looked at me, really looked at me, I saw someone who understands what it is to fight for every little thing. Someone who knows that life does not hand you anything on a silver platter, someone real. I am hardly special, Nathan. I am just trying to survive like everyone else. That is where you are wrong. Most people give up. They let circumstances crush them down and they stop fighting. But you are still fighting. I can see it in the way you hold yourself, the way you do not let Constance or her mother break you. That takes strength." Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. "You barely know me. Then let me know you better. That is what I am asking for. Time to see where this goes without either of us making assumptions about how it ends. The bank clerk at the boarding house proposed marriage to me this week," Eleanor said abruptly. "Well, not proposed exactly, more like offered me a practical partnership. He was very clear that it would not be a love match. Nathan's jaw tightened. "What did you tell him?" I said no. Eleanor met his eyes. I said no because even though it was practical and safe and everything sensible people would advise me to accept, I could not imagine spending the rest of my life with someone who saw me as a solution to a housekeeping problem. I want more than that. I deserve more than that, even if I am not entirely sure I believe it yet. You do believe it. You just need practice saying it out loud. Nathan reached over and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. I cannot promise you anything except that I will be honest with you, and I will treat you with the respect you deserve. The rest we will figure out as we go. Eleanor looked down at their joined hands, at the way his fingers curled gently around hers. It felt significant, this small gesture, like they were sealing some kind of agreement. I would like that, the figuring it out part. They stayed by the river until the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in exactly the shades of red and gold that Nathan had compared to her hair. Eleanor thought about pointing out the parallel, but decided some things did not need to be spoken aloud. It was enough to sit beside him and watch the colors shift and change, to feel the simple contentment of being with someone who saw her as she wished to be seen. Walking back to town, Nathan asked, "When can I see you again?" "Saturday is my only regular day off. But I sometimes have a few hours free on Wednesday evenings after supper is served and cleaned up." "Wednesday, then. I could come by around 7 if that works. Maybe we could just walk around town, let people get used to seeing us together." Eleanor smiled at that, at the quiet statement of intent it represented. He was not trying to hide their courtship, was not treating her like something to be ashamed of. "Yes, Wednesday at 7. Mrs. Morrison was waiting when Eleanor returned, arms crossed and expression thunderous. "You missed afternoon tea service. I beg your pardon. I thought I had the full afternoon off. You thought wrong. Mr. Gibbons specifically requested tea at 4, and I had to prepare it myself because you were off gallivanting with your cowboy." Eleanor took a slow breath, choosing her words carefully. "I apologize for the misunderstanding. I was under the impression that Saturday afternoons were my free time. Perhaps we should establish a clearer schedule going forward so this does not happen again. Perhaps you should remember your place and stop acting like you have the same freedoms as a proper young lady. You work for me, Eleanor. That means you are available when I need you. With respect, madam, I work for you during specified hours in exchange for room, board, and wages. If you expect me to be available at all times, then we need to renegotiate my compensation." The words were out before Eleanor could stop them, shocking both herself and Mrs. Morrison into momentary silence. She had never pushed back so directly before, had always swallowed the unfair demands and unpredictable expectations. Mrs. Morrison's face went pale with anger. "How dare you speak to me that way? After everything I have done for you, taking you in when you had nothing, giving you work when no one else would have you. You paid me below standard wages to work longer hours than any other employee in town would tolerate. You gave me the worst room in the house and docked my pay whenever you felt I had made a mistake, whether I had or not. I am grateful for the opportunity you provided when my parents died, but let us not pretend it was charity. I have earned every penny and then some. Get out of my sight. Go to your room and do not come down until I send for you." Eleanor went, her legs shaking but her head held high. She had probably just made a terrible mistake, but she could not quite bring herself to regret it. She was tired of being treated like she should be grateful for the privilege of being exploited. In her room, Eleanor sat on the cot and waited for the inevitable consequences. An hour passed. then 2. Finally, as dusk was settling over Yuma, she heard footsteps on the stairs and Constance's voice calling her name. "Mother wants to see you in her office." Eleanor descended to find Mrs. Morrison sitting behind her small desk, ledger open in front of her. The older woman did not look up when Eleanor entered. "I have calculated what you are owed in wages through the end of this month. You will pack your belongings and be out of this house by noon tomorrow." The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow, even though part of her had been expecting them. "You are letting me go. I am terminating your employment due to insubordination and failure to fulfill your duties. I will not give you a reference, as I cannot in good conscience recommend someone with your attitude to another employer. Mrs. Morrison, please." "I apologize if I was disrespectful, but nothing. You made your feelings quite clear. You believe you are too good for this position, that you are being taken advantage of. Well, you are free to find employment elsewhere and see how much better you fare." Eleanor felt panic rising in her throat. "Where am I supposed to go? I have no family, no other connections in Yuma." "That is not my concern. You should have thought of that before speaking to me in such a manner." Mrs. Morrison finally looked up, her expression cold. "You have until noon tomorrow. I suggest you start packing." Back in her room, Eleanor pulled out her tin box with shaking hands. $27.35. Enough for maybe 2 months in a cheap boarding house, if she could find one that would take her without a reference. Not enough to leave Yuma. Not enough to start over. Not enough for anything except a slow slide into destitution. She had been so stupid, so recklessly stupid. One afternoon of feeling strong and valued, and she had thrown away 5 years of careful survival. What had she been thinking, talking back to Mrs. Morrison like that? What had she imagined would happen? Eleanor lay awake most of the night, her mind spinning through possibilities and discarding them one by one. By dawn, she had settled on a desperate plan. She would go to the other boarding houses and hotels in town and offer to work for room and board only, no wages. Someone would need the help, surely. She would have to abandon her savings goals, but at least she would have a roof over her head. The morning was a blur of packing her few possessions and enduring the curious stares of the boarders at breakfast. Word had clearly spread about her dismissal, and the men ate in unusual silence, as if watching a public execution. Constance looked smugly satisfied, and Eleanor had to resist the urge to throw a plate at her head. At 11:30, Eleanor carried her trunk downstairs and collected her final wages from Mrs. Morrison. The older woman counted out the money with exaggerated precision, then held it out without a word. Eleanor took it, added it to her tin box, and walked out the front door without looking back. She made it halfway down the block before the reality of her situation fully hit her, and she had to stop, setting her trunk down and pressing a hand to her chest. She had nowhere to go. She was standing in the middle of Yuma with everything she owned in a trunk and less than $35 to her name. The sun was merciless overhead, and the street seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions, offering no clear path forward. Eleanor. She turned to find Nathan riding toward her on a rangy bay horse, his expression shifting from surprise to concern as he took in the trunk and her obvious distress. "What happened? What is going on? I got fired. I have to find somewhere else to stay, but I do not have a reference and I do not have enough money to be particular." The words came out flat and factual, as if she was discussing someone else's disaster. Nathan dismounted and stood in front of her, his eyes searching her face. "Tell me what happened. All of it." So she did, the whole sorry tale spilling out in the middle of the street while townspeople walked around them with curious glances. Nathan listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as she explained Mrs. Morrison's demands and her own uncharacteristic defiance. "That woman had no right to treat you that way," he said when she finished. "You did nothing wrong." "I should have kept my mouth shut. I knew better than to push back. Now I am paying for my pride." "No. You stood up for yourself, which took courage. The fact that she punished you for it says everything about her character and nothing about yours." Nathan picked up her trunk as if it weighed nothing. "Come on, I am taking you to the Double Creek." "What?" "Nathan, I cannot just show up at your employer's ranch. What will people think?" "They will think I am helping someone who needs help. The boss's wife runs a boarding operation for cowboys between jobs. She is always looking for help with the cooking and laundry. The pay is decent, and she treats her workers fair. I will vouch for you. You barely know me. Why would you stake your reputation on me like this?" Nathan set the trunk down again and took both her hands in his. "Because when I look at you, I see someone worth taking a chance on. Because you deserve better than what this town has given you. And because I am asking you to trust me, just like I am trusting you. We will figure this out together." Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest, some tight knot of fear and isolation that had been there so long she had forgotten what it felt like to be without it. "Okay, take me to the Double Creek." The ride out of town felt surreal. Eleanor sitting behind Nathan on his horse with her arms wrapped around his waist and her trunk tied behind the saddle. She had never been on a horse before, and the swaying motion made her nervous, but Nathan's solid presence in front of her was reassuring. The Double Creek Ranch spread across a wide valley 5 miles east of Yuma, with the ranch house visible from almost a mile away. It was a sprawling adobe structure with a deep porch and several outbuildings arranged in a practical layout. Cattle dotted the landscape, moving slowly in the heat, and Eleanor could see several cowboys working with horses in a large corral. Nathan rode straight to the main house and helped Eleanor dismount before tying his horse to the porch rail. "Wait here. Let me talk to Mrs. Kendrick first." He disappeared inside, and Eleanor stood in the yard feeling conspicuous and uncertain. A few cowboys glanced her way but quickly returned to their work when she met their eyes. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few minutes, Nathan emerged with a tall woman in her 40s who had the kind of capable, no-nonsense air that suggested she could handle anything life threw at her. "Miss Larson, I am Catherine Kendrick. Nathan tells me you are looking for work." "Yes, madam. I have 5 years of experience in boarding house operations. I can cook, clean, do laundry, and handle most household tasks. I am a hard worker and I do not cause trouble." Catherine studied her with sharp but not unkind eyes. "Nathan also tells me that Martha Morrison dismissed you for standing up for yourself. Is that accurate?" Eleanor hesitated, unsure how much truth would help or hurt her case. "Mrs. Morrison and I had a disagreement about my schedule and working conditions. I spoke more plainly than I should have, and she decided to terminate my employment. Martha Morrison is a miserable woman who has driven off more good workers than I can count," Catherine said bluntly. "Her loss is my potential gain. I need someone to help with meals for the hands and keep the bunkhouse in order. It is hard work, but I pay fair wages, provide a private room, and I do not dock pay for imaginary mistakes. You interested?" "Very much so, madam." "Then the job is yours on a trial basis. 1 month to see if we suit each other. Nathan, help Miss Larson get settled in the spare room off the kitchen. After that, you need to get back to work. Those horses are not going to break themselves." The room Catherine showed Eleanor to was small but clean, with a real bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the ranch yard. It was easily twice the size of her room at the boarding house, and when Eleanor sat on the bed, the mattress gave with actual softness. "I cannot believe this is happening," she said as Nathan set her trunk down. "A few hours ago I was standing in the street with no prospects, and now I have a job and a room with a real bed. You have more than that." Nathan sat beside her, careful to leave proper space between them. "You have a fresh start, a chance to build something different, because of you. If you had not come along when you did, I do not know what I would have done. You would have figured something out. You are stronger than you think, Eleanor." He reached over and tucked a strand of red hair behind her ear, the gesture gentle and intimate. "But I am glad I could help, and I am glad you are here where I can see you more often. Mrs. Kendrick might not approve of you courting someone who works for her. Mrs. Kendrick is practical. As long as we do our jobs and do not cause drama, she will not interfere. Besides, her husband was a cowboy when they met. She married him when he did not have 2 nickels to rub together, and they built this place from nothing. She understands that love does not always follow convenient paths." Eleanor's breath caught on the word love, but Nathan did not seem to notice what he had said. Or maybe he did notice and said it anyway, putting the possibility out there for her to consider. The next few weeks settled into a rhythm that felt almost too good to be true. Eleanor worked hard, harder than she had at the boarding house because she wanted to prove she was worth the chance Catherine had given her. She cooked 3 meals a day for the ranch hands, kept the bunkhouse clean, and handled the endless laundry that came with housing a dozen working cowboys. The work was exhausting, but Catherine was true to her word about fair treatment. She paid Eleanor's wages on time, never docked for imaginary infractions, and even showed appreciation when Eleanor introduced a new recipe that the hands particularly enjoyed. Nathan was around often, since he lived in the bunkhouse with the other single cowboys. He was careful to be respectful and professional during work hours, but in the evenings, they would often sit together on the porch and talk while the desert cooled around them. They fell into an easy companionship that deepened with each conversation, each shared story, each moment of comfortable silence. Eleanor learned that Nathan had a wry sense of humor that emerged once he was comfortable, and that he was fiercely loyal to the people he cared about. She learned that he read books when he could get his hands on them, favoring adventure stories and anything about far-off places. She learned that he had a beautiful singing voice that he only used when he thought no one was listening, crooning old ballads to the horses he was training. Nathan learned that Eleanor had a sharp mind for numbers, and had been keeping meticulous records of the boarding house accounts, long before Mrs. Morrison realized the value of such organization. He learned that she had a gift for growing things, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn desert soil in Catherine's kitchen garden. He learned that she laughed rarely but beautifully, and that earning one of those laughs felt like winning a prize. 6 weeks after Eleanor arrived at the Double Creek, Nathan asked her to go riding with him on her day off. Catherine lent Eleanor one of the gentler ranch horses, and Nathan led them out past the cattle toward a section of land that bordered the Colorado River. "There is something I want to show you," he said as they rode. They followed the river for about a mile before Nathan turned toward a plateau that offered a panoramic view of the valley. It was stunning, the kind of vista that made you understand why people fell in love with the West, despite its harshness. The river gleamed in the sunlight, and the distant mountains rose purple and imposing against the blue sky. "Jacob and I found this place when we first came to Yuma," Nathan said, dismounting and helping Eleanor down. "We used to come here and talk about what we would do someday when we had our own spread. Jacob wanted to build right there." He pointed to a spot about halfway down the plateau where the land flattened out. Said it had good access to water, decent grazing, and the prettiest view in Arizona territory. "It is beautiful," Eleanor agreed, shading her eyes to look where he was pointing. "The land came up for sale last month. 320 acres, including this whole section along the river. I have been saving for years, and I finally have enough for the down payment." Eleanor turned to stare at him. "Nathan, that is wonderful. You are buying your own ranch." "I am thinking about it, making an offer anyway, but I wanted to show you first, wanted to know what you thought." He was watching her carefully, as if her opinion mattered more than he was saying. "What I think? Nathan, this is your dream. Why does it matter what I think?" "Because I am not just buying land, Eleanor. I am buying a future, and I have been hoping these past weeks that maybe you might want to be part of that future." Her heart was suddenly hammering so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "What are you saying?" Nathan took her hands, his expression serious but hopeful. "I am saying that I am in love with you. I know we have not known each other that long by conventional standards, but I know my own mind. You are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever met, and I cannot imagine building a life here without you in it. Nathan, let me finish. I am not asking you to marry me right this second. I know that would not be fair. But I am asking if you think you could love me back, given time. If you think maybe we could build something here together. I want to buy this land and build a house on it, and I want to fill that house with laughter and children and a lifetime of sunsets. But only if you want that too." Eleanor looked out at the land he was describing, trying to picture what he saw. A house standing where now there was only open ground, cattle grazing peacefully, children playing by the river, a life built from nothing but hard work and hope and love. "I am afraid," she said quietly. "I am afraid to believe this is real. My whole life people have told me I was not enough, that I should be grateful for whatever scraps came my way. And now you are offering me everything, and I do not know how to trust it. I understand that. And I am not asking you to decide everything right now. I am just asking you to give us a chance. Stay at the Double Creek. Let me court you properly. Get to know me well enough to see that I mean what I say, and then, when you are ready, tell me yes or no." "Yes." The word came out before Eleanor could overthink it. Yes to courting, or yes to? Yes to all of it, to courting and building and trying. I am still afraid, but I am more afraid of letting fear stop me from reaching for something real. She stepped closer to him, looking up into his face. "I love you too, Nathan Kane. I think I have since the day you told me I looked like a sunset." Nathan's answering smile was brilliant, and then he was kissing her, gentle but sure, his hands cupping her face like she was something precious. Eleanor melted into him, letting herself believe for the first time that she might actually get to keep this happiness. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "I am going to make the offer on the land tomorrow. And then I am going to build you a house, Eleanor Larson, the best damned house in Arizona territory. I do not need the best house, I just need you. You are getting both anyway." They spent the rest of the afternoon on the plateau, planning and dreaming aloud about what their life might look like. Nathan wanted to focus on horse breeding along with cattle ranching, taking advantage of his training skills. Eleanor wanted a big kitchen garden and maybe some chickens, and a library with real books that they could read together in the evenings. They both wanted children, though they agreed to wait a few years until the ranch was more established. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in those familiar shades of red and gold, Nathan pulled Eleanor close and kissed the top of her head. "You really do look like a sunset," he murmured. "I was not just saying that to be nice. Every time I see the colors in the sky, I think of you. I used to hate my hair, used to wish every day that I could wake up and be blonde or brunette, anything but this. I am glad you did not change. You are perfect exactly as you are." Eleanor tilted her head back to look at him. "I am not perfect. I am stubborn and defensive, and I have a temper when pushed too far. still perfect to me. I do not want some delicate flower who wilts at the first sign of trouble. I want a partner who can stand beside me and fight for what we build together. That is you, Eleanor. That has always been you." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them wrapped in their own thoughts. When they arrived, Catherine was on the porch snapping beans, and she looked up with a knowing smile. "I take it the outing went well." "Very well, madam," Nathan said. "I am going to make an offer on the Riverside property tomorrow, and Eleanor has agreed to let me court her with serious intentions. About time you both came to your senses. Eleanor, I will need you to decide soon if you are staying on here or moving when Nathan's place is ready. I will need to hire someone new if you are leaving, and good help is hard to find." Eleanor felt a rush of affection for this practical woman who had given her a chance when no one else would. "I am not going anywhere for a while yet, Mrs. Kendrick. Nathan still has to buy the land, build a house, and make enough progress on the ranch to support a family. That will take time." "Good. Then I get to keep my best cook a while longer. Now both of you go wash up. Supper is in an hour, and I need Eleanor's help with the biscuits." The next several months were a blur of activity. Nathan's offer on the land was accepted, and he spent every spare moment working on his new property. Several of the other cowboys from the Double Creek helped during their off days, and slowly, a house began to take shape on the plateau. It was not fancy, just a simple 4-room structure with a covered porch, but it was solid and well built and positioned to catch the evening breezes. Eleanor divided her time between her duties at the ranch and helping Nathan whenever she could. She had never built anything before, but she learned to mix adobe, to lay stone for the fireplace, to hang doors and windows. The work was hard and left her exhausted at the end of each day, but it was satisfying in a way her boarding house work had never been. She was creating something permanent, something that would last. They were married in November of 1878, 7 months after that first meeting in Yuma's dusty street. The ceremony was small, held at the Double Creek with Catherine and her husband standing as witnesses. Nathan wore his best clothes, and Eleanor wore a simple white dress that Catherine had helped her make. She braided wildflowers into her red hair and tried not to cry as Nathan slipped a plain gold band onto her finger. "You are officially Eleanor Kane now," he said softly, kissing her in front of their small gathering of friends. "And I am officially the luckiest man in Arizona territory." They spent their wedding night in the house Nathan had built, even though it was not quite finished. The furniture was sparse, and they had to cook over the fireplace because the stove had not been delivered yet. But none of that mattered. They lay together in the bed Nathan had built with his own hands, in the house they had raised together, and talked long into the night about the future they were creating. "Do you ever regret it?" Nathan asked in the darkness. "Choosing this uncertain life with me instead of taking Theodore Walsh's practical offer." Eleanor propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Not for one single second. This, right here, is everything I never knew I was allowed to want. You gave me that, Nathan. You looked at me and saw someone worth loving. I saw someone worth everything, and I plan to spend the rest of my life proving that to you." The first year of marriage was harder than Eleanor had anticipated, but also more rewarding. Building a ranch from nothing required backbreaking work from both of them. Nathan focused on the livestock and building the necessary outbuildings, while Eleanor managed the house, started her garden, and handled the endless administrative tasks that came with running a business. Money was tight, tighter than they had expected. There were unexpected expenses and setbacks, including losing several head of cattle to a disease outbreak and having to replace a section of fence that collapsed during a flash flood. Eleanor went back to her old habits of saving every penny, stretching their supplies as far as they would go, doing without anything that was not strictly necessary. But there were good moments, too. The first time they sat down to dinner in their own home, eating vegetables from Eleanor's garden off plates they had bought together in Yuma. The evening Nathan came in from working with the horses and found Eleanor singing while she cooked, and they ended up dancing in the kitchen to no music but their own laughter. The morning Eleanor woke up sick and realized with equal parts joy and terror that she was pregnant. "Are you sure?" Nathan asked, his hand hovering over her still flat stomach as if he could feel the change. "As sure as I can be. I am nearly 2 months late, and I have been sick every morning for the past week. Mrs. Kendrick says those are pretty reliable signs." Nathan's face went through about 6 different emotions in rapid succession before settling on pure joy. "We are having a baby. Eleanor, we are having a baby. Are you happy? I know we said we wanted to wait a few more years until the ranch was more stable." "Happy. I am terrified and thrilled and more in love with you than I thought was humanly possible." He pulled her close, careful of her delicate stomach. "We will figure it out. We always do." Thomas Jacob Kane was born in July of 1879, arriving during one of the hottest weeks of summer after a labor that lasted nearly 20 hours. Eleanor had never experienced pain like that, and there were moments during the worst of it when she was certain she was going to die. But Catherine was there, experienced and unflappable, guiding her through each contraction and telling her exactly what to do. When Thomas finally arrived, small and red-faced and wailing at the top of his lungs, Eleanor felt something shift fundamentally in her understanding of the world. This tiny person, so utterly dependent on her, represented everything good and terrifying about the future. Nathan cried when he held his son for the first time, tears streaming down his face as he stared at the baby in wonder. "He is perfect. Eleanor, he is absolutely perfect." "He has your eyes," Eleanor said weakly from the bed, exhausted but unable to look away from her husband and child. "And your hair. Look at that red fuzz. He is going to look just like his beautiful mother." Thomas was a colicky baby who seemed to only sleep for 20 minutes at a time, and there were dark circles under both Nathan and Eleanor's eyes for the first few months. But he was also sweet and curious, watching everything with those big dark eyes, and Eleanor fell more in love with him every day. The ranch slowly grew more prosperous. Nathan's reputation as a horse trainer spread, and he started getting contracts to break and train animals for other ranchers. Eleanor took in sewing and sold vegetables from her garden to supplement their income. It was still hard work, still a daily struggle to make ends meet, but they were building something real and lasting. When Thomas was 2 years old, Eleanor became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and their daughter Sarah Catherine arrived in the spring of 1882 with far less drama than her brother. She was a calm baby, content to lie in her cradle and observe the world with serious eyes. "2 children," Nathan marveled, holding Sarah while Thomas played at his feet. "We have 2 perfect children and a ranch that is actually turning a profit and a wife who still takes my breath away. How did I get so lucky?" "We worked for it," Eleanor corrected. "Every bit of this we fought for and earned." She was right, Nathan thought. Nothing about their life had been handed to them. They had taken the raw materials of their circumstances and built something worth having. The house had grown, with 2 more rooms added to accommodate their expanding family. The herd had increased. They now employed 2 hired hands during the busy seasons. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable and secure in a way that neither of them had been before. Years passed, marked by the seasons and the growth of their children. Thomas grew tall and serious like his father, but with his mother's stubborn determination. Sarah was quieter but possessed a quick mind and a talent for numbers that reminded Nathan of Eleanor. In 1885, they had another son, William, who had his father's easy laugh and love of horses. The ranch continued to prosper. Nathan's horse breeding program became well known throughout the territory, and people came from miles around to buy his trained animals. Eleanor's kitchen garden expanded into a small farm operation, supplying vegetables to several businesses in Yuma. They built a new barn and added on to the house again, creating separate bedrooms for each child. Life was not without its hardships. There were droughts that left them struggling to keep the cattle watered. There were illnesses that swept through the family, leaving everyone weak and frightened. There was the year a wildfire came within a mile of the house before the wind shifted and saved them. But through all of it, Nathan and Eleanor faced each challenge together, their partnership stronger for every obstacle overcome. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nathan took Eleanor back to the plateau, where he had first told her he loved her. The children were with Catherine for the evening, giving them a rare moment of privacy. "You remember what this place looked like when I first brought you here?" Nathan asked, gesturing at the valley below where their ranch spread out in organized productivity. Empty land and big dreams. "I remember thinking you were either crazy or the bravest person I had ever met. Probably a little of both, but I meant every word I said that day. About wanting to build a life with you, about filling our house with laughter and children and sunsets." Eleanor leaned against him, comfortable and content. "You did all that and more. We did all that together. I have something for you." Nathan pulled a small wrapped package from his pocket. "It is not much, but I wanted you to have it." Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a pendant shaped like a sunset, all flowing lines of red and gold. It was beautiful and clearly expensive, and Eleanor looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "Nathan, this is too much. It is not nearly enough. 10 years ago, you took a chance on a cowboy with nothing but land and dreams. You worked beside me to build all of this." He gestured at the ranch below. "You gave me 3 beautiful children and a life better than anything I ever imagined. A necklace cannot repay that, but I wanted you to have something that reminded you how much you are loved." Eleanor let him fasten the necklace around her neck, then turned to kiss him properly. "I do not need reminders. You show me every single day how much I am loved. But I will treasure this anyway because it came from you." They stayed on the plateau as the sun set, watching the sky turn those familiar shades of red and gold. Nathan pulled Eleanor close and kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair. "You still look like a sunset," he murmured, "even after all these years. Even with gray starting to show in that beautiful red hair, you still take my breath away." "We are getting old," Eleanor said with a smile. "Respectable ranch owners with 3 children and responsibilities. Not the young dreamers we used to be. Speak for yourself. I still dream. I dream about growing old with you, about watching our children grow up and have families of their own. I dream about sitting on our porch when we are gray and creaky, still holding hands and watching sunsets." "Those are good dreams, Eleanor, the best kind." She turned in his arms to face him. "I love you, Nathan Kane. I loved you when you saved me from that runaway wagon, and I loved you when you told me I was beautiful for the first time in my life. I loved you when we built this house with our own hands, and I loved you through every hard moment and every triumph. And I will love you for whatever years we have left, until my last breath. That is all I have ever wanted, your love and a chance to prove myself worthy of it. You proved that a long time ago. Every single day you prove it." They rode back to the ranch as twilight settled over the valley, comfortable in each other's presence and in the life they had created. The house glowed with lamplight, and Eleanor could hear the children's laughter even before they reached the porch. This was home, she thought. This place they had built from nothing but hope and hard work, and a cowboy's simple observation that she looked like a sunset. The years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to the life Nathan and Eleanor had built. Thomas grew into a capable young man who took naturally to ranch work, learning everything his father could teach him about horses and cattle. Sarah developed into a serious scholar, always reading when she could steal a moment away from chores. William remained the family jester, able to coax a smile from even the grumpiest ranch hand. In 1888, Eleanor gave birth to twins, a boy and girl they named Daniel and Rose. The pregnancy was difficult, and the birth itself was complicated enough that Catherine insisted they bring in the doctor from Yuma. Eleanor was nearly 30 years old by then, and the recovery took longer than her previous pregnancies. But both babies were healthy and strong, and Nathan was beside himself with joy at having 5 children filling their home with noise and chaos. "We should probably stop now," Eleanor said one night as they lay in bed, listening to one of the twins crying in the next room. "I am getting too old for this, and 5 children is more than enough. 5 children is perfect, and you are not old, you are just right." Nathan kissed her forehead. "But yes, 5 is probably our limit. I do not think the house can handle any more expansion." The ranch was thriving now, recognized as one of the premier horse breeding operations in Arizona territory. Nathan had built a reputation for honesty and quality that brought customers from across the Southwest. Eleanor had expanded her agricultural operation and now supplied produce to half the restaurants in Yuma. They had 6 full-time employees and a brand new barn that was the envy of the county. But success brought its own challenges. There were neighboring ranchers who resented Nathan and Eleanor's prosperity, particularly given Eleanor's origins. More than once, someone made comments about the red-haired boarding house girl who had gotten above herself. Eleanor learned to hold her head high and ignore the whispers, knowing that her life spoke louder than anyone's gossip. In 1890, when Thomas was 11, a well-dressed man arrived at the ranch asking to speak with Nathan about purchasing some breeding stock. He introduced himself as Marcus Pemberton, owner of a large cattle operation in New Mexico territory. "I have heard excellent things about your horses, Mr. Kane. I am looking to improve my breeding program, and I am willing to pay top dollar for quality animals." Nathan showed him around the ranch, pointing out various horses and explaining their bloodlines. Marcus seemed impressed, nodding and asking intelligent questions. Then his eyes landed on Eleanor, who was working in the garden with Sarah and Rose. "That is your wife, the one with the red hair." Nathan's tone cooled instantly. "That is Eleanor Kane, yes, best woman in Arizona territory and too good for me by half." Marcus held up his hands. "No offense meant. It is just that I heard the story about how you two met, about how you defended her from a runaway wagon. They say she was just a servant girl when you married her. They say a lot of things, most of them wrong. Eleanor is my partner in every sense of the word. She has worked as hard as I have to build this ranch. Harder, probably, since she also manages our home and 5 children. Still, marrying so far below your station, that must have been difficult." Nathan stepped closer to Marcus, his expression hardening. "Let me be very clear, Mr. Pemberton. Eleanor did not marry below her station. If anything, she married below hers by taking a chance on a cowboy with nothing but land and dreams. She is the smartest, strongest, most capable person I have ever known, and I will not tolerate anyone suggesting otherwise. Is that understood?" Marcus backed up a step, clearly not used to being spoken to so directly. "Of course, I apologize if I offended. You did offend, and now I am going to have to decline your business. I do not work with people who disrespect my wife. That is a bit extreme, do not you think? I am offering to buy multiple horses at premium prices. Money is not more important than respect. I suggest you find another breeder for your needs. Good day, Mr. Pemberton. Nathan watched the man ride away, then walked over to where Eleanor was still working in the garden. She had clearly overheard the conversation, and there were tears in her eyes. You just turned away a major sale because of me. I turned away an insulting man who has no respect for the woman I love. That is not even a difficult decision, Eleanor. Nathan, we could have used that money. The new barn expenses, the twins needing clothes, Thomas wanting to go to school in Yuma next year. We will find the money somewhere else. What I will not do is stand there and let someone talk about you like you are less than you are. He pulled her close, ignoring the dirt on her hands and dress. You are Eleanor Kane, finest woman in the West. You are a successful businesswoman, a devoted mother, and my beloved wife. Anyone who cannot see that is blind, and I have no use for blind people. Eleanor buried her face in his chest, overwhelmed by emotion. Even after 12 years of marriage, Nathan still defended her so fiercely, still saw her through those same loving eyes that had looked past her red hair and freckles to the person underneath. I love you, she whispered. Even when you make impractical decisions out of stubbornness. Especially when I make impractical decisions out of stubbornness, Nathan corrected with a smile. That is when you know it is real. The twins had their second birthday in 1890, and the ranch celebrated with a party that brought together friends from across the county. Catherine and her husband came from the Double Creek, bringing their own children and grandchildren. Several of Nathan's cowboy friends made the trip, along with families from neighboring ranches. Even the priest from Yuma's Catholic church attended, bringing a basket of sweet rolls his housekeeper had baked. Eleanor stood on the porch watching the celebration, marveling at how much her life had changed. 14 years ago, she had been a lonely servant girl with no family and no prospects, mocked for her appearance and resigned to a life of drudgery. Now she was surrounded by friends and family, standing on land she and Nathan owned outright, watching her 5 children play together in the yard. You look happy, Catherine said, coming to stand beside her. Content. I am. It is strange. Sometimes I have to remind myself this is real, that I did not just dream it all up. You earned it. Every bit of happiness you have, you fought for and earned. Catherine squeezed her arm. I am proud of you, Eleanor, proud of the woman you have become and the life you have built. I could not have done it without you. If you had not given me that job when Nathan brought me to the Double Creek, you would have found another way. You are a survivor, but I am glad I could help, and I am even gladder that things worked out the way they did. You and Nathan are good for each other. Anyone with eyes can see that. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in those familiar shades of red and gold, Nathan called for everyone's attention. He stood in the middle of the yard with Eleanor beside him, his arm around her waist. I just want to thank everyone for coming today to celebrate with us. My family means everything to me, and having you all here to share in our joy makes it even better. He turned to look at Eleanor, his eyes soft with love. 14 years ago, I met a woman standing in a street in Yuma, and I thought she was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I told her she looked like a sunset, and she looked at me like I was crazy. Laughter rippled through the crowd, but I meant it then, and I mean it now. Eleanor Kane is my sunset, the most beautiful part of every single day. She is also my sunrise, my partner, my best friend, and the mother of my children. Everything good in my life started the day I met her, so this party is not just for the twins. It is also to celebrate the woman who made all of this possible, To Eleanor! To Eleanor! The crowd echoed, raising their glasses. Eleanor felt her cheeks flush, but she held her head high and accepted the toast with grace. These people were not mocking her. They were celebrating her, seeing her the way Nathan saw her, and it was overwhelming and wonderful and more than she had ever thought to want. The years rolled on with that mix of joy and challenge that characterized life on a working ranch. The children grew and changed, each developing their own personality and interests. Thomas decided he wanted to be a lawyer instead of a rancher, which surprised Nathan but ultimately delighted him. Sarah discovered a talent for painting and filled the house with canvases depicting desert landscapes. William remained horse-crazy, following his father everywhere and learning every aspect of the breeding business. The twins were still too young to have declared their interests, but they showed signs of being bright and curious. In 1895, Arizona Territory saw some of its worst drought years. Water became scarce, and ranchers across the region struggled to keep their herds alive. Nathan and Eleanor made the difficult decision to sell off part of their cattle herd, focusing instead on the horse breeding operation, which required less water. It was financially painful, but it kept the ranch solvent when other operations were failing. During those hard years, Eleanor's garden became crucial to their survival. She had learned techniques for desert agriculture that allowed her to grow vegetables with minimal water, and she traded her produce for supplies and services with other families. The community pulled together, helping each other through the difficult times, and Nathan and Eleanor often opened their home to families who needed temporary shelter or assistance. "This is what it means to be neighbors," Nathan told their children one evening at dinner. "When times are hard, we help each other. We share what we have. We do not turn our backs just because someone is struggling." Eleanor looked at him across the table and felt her love for him swell even larger. He was teaching their children the same values that had led him to help a red-haired servant girl 14 years ago, the same kindness and decency that had changed her life. Those values would be their children's inheritance, more valuable than any amount of land or money. The drought finally broke in 1896 with a series of heavy rains that turned the desert green and refilled the depleted water sources. The ranch recovered slowly, and Nathan began the process of rebuilding their cattle herd. Thomas left for school in Phoenix, determined to pursue his law degree. Sarah began teaching art classes to children in Yuma, earning money to fund her own education. The family was changing, growing up and moving into new phases, and Eleanor felt the bittersweet ache of watching her babies become independent people. On a warm evening in the fall of 1897, Eleanor and Nathan sat on their porch watching another spectacular sunset. They had been married 19 years, and the ranch had weathered another successful season. Their children were healthy and thriving. The house stood solid and comfortable, expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family. Everything they had dreamed about on that plateau so long ago had come to pass. "You ever miss it?" Eleanor asked suddenly. "The adventure and freedom of your cowboy days before you were tied down to a ranch and a family?" Nathan considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it. Just me and a horse and the open range, but I would not trade this for anything. Every year with you has been better than the last. Watching our children grow, building something that will last beyond us, falling more in love with you every single day. That is an adventure better than anything I experienced on the trail, even the hard parts. The drought years, the money troubles, the nights when the babies were sick and we were so scared. Especially the hard parts. Those are what prove that what we have is real. Anyone can be happy when things are easy." but going through challenges together and coming out stronger on the other side, that is what builds a real partnership. Eleanor reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. I am glad you stopped that runaway wagon. Glad you looked at me and saw someone worth saving. I am glad you took a chance on a cowboy with big dreams and no certainty. You could have played it safe with that bank clerk, but you chose to take a risk with me instead. Best decision I ever made. They sat in companionable silence as the colors in the sky shifted and deepened, turning from bright gold to deep red to soft purple. The sunset that Nathan had first compared to Eleanor's hair so many years ago, the simple observation that had opened up possibilities neither of them had dared imagine. In 1898, Thomas graduated from law school and opened a practice in Phoenix. Sarah married a schoolteacher from Yuma and moved to town, though she visited the ranch often with her husband. William, now 16, was managing much of the day-to-day horse operation, proving to have inherited his father's gift with animals. The twins, Daniel and Rose, were 9 and showing signs of the same strong personalities their older siblings possessed. Nathan and Eleanor, now in their early 40s, began discussing what they wanted for the future. The ranch was well established and profitable. Their children were launched, or nearly so. They had achieved everything they had worked for, and now they had the luxury of thinking beyond mere survival. I want to travel, Eleanor said one night. I want to see the ocean. I want to visit those faraway places you used to read about in your adventure books. Nathan looked surprised. Really? I thought you loved the ranch, loved being settled here. I do love it, but that does not mean I do not want to see more of the world. We have spent 20 years building this place, building our family. Maybe now we could take some time to explore together. What about the ranch? We cannot just leave William to run it alone. William is more than capable, and we could hire additional help. We would not be gone forever, just a few months at a time. I want to see California and the Pacific Ocean. I want to visit Thomas in Phoenix and Sarah in town. I want adventures with you, Nathan, while we are still young enough to enjoy them. Nathan pulled her close, his expression thoughtful. I like that idea, more than I expected to. We could see San Francisco, maybe go up to Oregon, see some country that is not all desert and dust. Exactly. We have earned it, do you not think? 20 years of hard work and sacrifice. We deserve to enjoy ourselves a bit. They began planning their first journey, a trip to California that they scheduled for the following spring. William was thrilled to have more responsibility, and they hired 2 experienced ranch hands to assist him. Sarah and her husband agreed to check in regularly, and Catherine promised to keep an eye on things from the Double Creek. In April of 1899, Nathan and Eleanor set out on their first real adventure together. They took the train west, watching the landscape change from familiar desert to mountains to finally the green valleys of California. Eleanor's excitement was infectious, and Nathan found himself seeing everything through her eyes, rediscovering wonder he had lost to routine and responsibility. San Francisco was overwhelming and magnificent, a city unlike anything either of them had experienced. They stayed in a real hotel, ate in restaurants, walked along the harbor watching ships come and go from exotic locations. Eleanor stood at the edge of the Pacific Ocean and cried, overwhelmed by its vastness and beauty. "Thank you," she said to Nathan, her hand in his as waves crashed at their feet. "Thank you for giving me this, for building a life with me that made this possible. Thank you for being brave enough to take a chance 20 years ago, for seeing past a dusty cowboy to the man underneath, for being my partner in everything." They spent 6 weeks in California before heading home, bringing gifts for the children and stories about everything they had seen. The ranch had run smoothly in their absence, confirming that they could indeed take time away without everything falling apart. Over the next few years, they took several more trips. They visited Thomas in Phoenix multiple times, meeting his colleagues and attending fancy parties where Eleanor wore beautiful dresses and Nathan wore suits that made him uncomfortable but looked distinguished. They went to New Mexico Territory, where they explored ancient ruins and stayed in haciendas that reminded Eleanor of the adobe ranch house Nathan had built her so long ago. They even made a trip back east, visiting Pennsylvania so Eleanor could see her childhood home one last time. But no matter where they traveled, they always came back to the ranch. The plateau overlooking the river, the house they had built together, the land they had tended and improved for 2 decades. That was home, the place where their story had truly begun and where they knew it would end. In 1902, Sarah gave birth to Nathan and Eleanor's first grandchild, a girl with red hair and freckles who Sarah named Eleanor after her mother. When Eleanor held her tiny granddaughter for the first time, she wept openly. "She is beautiful," she whispered. "Perfect in every way." "Just like her grandmother," Nathan said softly, his arm around his wife's shoulders. "I hope she grows up knowing how beautiful she is, instead of learning to doubt it the way you did." "We will make sure of it," Sarah promised. "We will tell her the story about how her grandfather told her grandmother she looked like a sunset, and how that one moment of kindness changed everything." Little Eleanor grew up hearing that story, along with all the other stories about her grandparents' courtship and the building of the ranch. She never doubted her own beauty or worth, confident in the knowledge that she was loved and valued exactly as she was. The legacy Nathan and Eleanor had built was not just about land and cattle and horses. It was about creating a family that understood the power of seeing people for who they really were. In 1905, William married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, and they moved into a house on the eastern section of the Kane Ranch. He officially took over the day-to-day operations, though Nathan still consulted on major decisions and could not quite give up working with the horses. Daniel announced he wanted to study agricultural science, hoping to bring new techniques to desert farming. Rose declared she was going to be a doctor, a goal that Nathan and Eleanor supported wholeheartedly, despite the raised eyebrows from more traditional neighbors. Nathan and Eleanor, now in their late 40s, settled into a comfortable routine of supporting their children's dreams while enjoying the fruits of their labor. They still took trips when the mood struck them, but more often they were content to sit on their porch and watch sunsets over the land they had tamed together. "You ever think about what your life would have been like if we had never met?" Eleanor asked one evening. "Sometimes. I probably would have kept drifting, working different ranches, never really settling anywhere. Maybe eventually I would have bought land somewhere, but it would not have meant the same thing without you beside me." "What about you?" Eleanor considered. "I think I would have survived somehow. Found another position somewhere, kept working and saving. Maybe eventually I would have had enough to start over somewhere new, but I would not have thrived. I would not have become the person I am now. You gave me that gift, Nathan. The gift of believing I could be more than what circumstances had made me. We gave that to each other. I was just a cowboy with no direction until I met you. You gave me something to work for, a reason to build instead of drift. We made each other better." In 1908, they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together 3 generations of family and friends. Thomas came from Phoenix with his new wife. Sarah and her husband brought their 3 children, including teenage Eleanor, who helped wrangle her younger siblings. William and his wife were there with their infant son. Daniel came home from university, and Rose took time off from her medical studies. The ranch looked beautiful, decorated with lanterns and flowers from Eleanor's garden. Tables groaned under the weight of food, prepared by Eleanor and Sarah working together in the kitchen they had once shared. Musicians played on the porch, and couples danced in the yard as the sun began to set. Nathan and Eleanor stood in the middle of the celebration, surrounded by the life they had created together, and Nathan raised his glass for a toast. 30 years ago, I married the most beautiful woman in Arizona territory. Everyone thought she looked like a sunset, but only I was smart enough to tell her so. Laughter and protests from the crowd. In these 30 years, we have built a ranch, raised 5 children, weathered droughts and prosperity, and loved each other through every moment. Eleanor Kane is still the most beautiful thing I see every single day, and I am still the luckiest man alive because she chose me. He turned to face her fully. Here is to 30 more years, my love, and to whatever comes after that. To Nathan and Eleanor, the crowd cheered. Eleanor felt Nathan's arms around her as the applause died down, and she let herself be held, savoring this perfect moment. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her, healthy and happy. Her husband looked at her with the same love and wonder he had shown 30 years ago when he first told her she was beautiful. The ranch spread around them, solid and prosperous, a testament to what 2 people could build when they worked together. "Thank you," she whispered against Nathan's chest. "For everything. For seeing me when no one else did. For loving me when I did not know how to love myself. For building this life with me. Thank you for saying yes. For taking a chance on a cowboy's dreams. For being my partner and my love." Nathan pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands. "You really do look like a sunset, you know. Even more now than you did back then. All those shades of red and gold and copper in your hair, catching the light. Still the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." Eleanor laughed through happy tears. "You are going to make me cry at my own anniversary party. Then cry. Cry because you are happy, because you are loved, because you have a life worth celebrating. That is nothing to be ashamed of." So she did cry, there in her husband's arms, surrounded by family and friends, under a sky turning those familiar shades of red and gold that had defined their love from the very beginning. And Nathan held her close, just as he had promised to do 30 years ago on a plateau overlooking a river, and would continue to do for whatever time they had left. The years that followed were gentle ones, marked more by contentment than struggle. Nathan and Eleanor gradually stepped back from the active management of the ranch, allowing William and Daniel, who had returned after finishing his studies, to take over most operations. They spent their days tending Eleanor's garden, taking long walks around the property, and spoiling their growing collection of grandchildren. In 1912, they celebrated the ranch's 40th anniversary with a quiet family dinner. Nathan was 54, his dark hair now streaked heavily with gray. Eleanor was 53, her red hair faded to a softer copper gold that Nathan still found beautiful. They moved a bit slower now, their joints protesting the decades of hard physical labor, but they were healthy and content. 40 years, Eleanor marveled, looking out over the land from their porch. "When you first brought me here, I could not imagine lasting 40 days, let alone 40 years. I knew we would make it. I knew from that first moment in the street that you were someone special." Nathan took her hand, his thumb rubbing the gold band she had worn for over 3 decades. "I do not regret a single moment, even the hard ones. Neither do I. Well, maybe the time Thomas broke his arm falling out of the barn loft. I could have done without that particular moment." Nathan chuckled. "Fair enough, but even that taught us something. Taught us how strong we were, how we could handle a crisis together. We have handled a lot together, Haven, not we. Built this place from nothing, raised 5 children, survived drought and disease and every other challenge the desert threw at us. And we are still here, still together, still in love. Nathan pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, still watching sunsets. They sat together as another day drew to a close, the sky performing its nightly show of color and light. The ranch hummed with activity around them as the next generation took over the work of maintaining what Nathan and Eleanor had built. Children's laughter drifted from William's house. Smoke rose from Daniel's chimney. In town, Sarah was likely putting her own children to bed while Thomas reviewed case files in his Phoenix office, and Rose tended to patients at her medical practice. All of it, every bit of it, had started with a cowboy's simple observation that a lonely, mocked young woman looked like a sunset. That one moment of kindness and seeing, of looking past surface judgments to the person underneath, had created ripples that spread across decades and touched dozens of lives. "You think our grandchildren will understand?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Will they know how hard we worked for all this? How much it meant to build something lasting? Some of them will. The ones who need to will. And maybe someday one of them will meet someone who needs to be seen, really seen, and they will remember the stories about us. About how a cowboy looked at a servant girl and saw beauty where everyone else saw only something to mock." Nathan kissed the top of her head. "That is the real legacy, Eleanor. Not the ranch or the money or any of it. The legacy is teaching people to see each other with kindness." Nathan Kane died peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1920, just shy of his 62nd birthday. Eleanor woke beside him that morning to find him gone, his face peaceful, his hand still resting on hers where they had fallen asleep. She sat with him for a long time before calling for William, memorizing every detail of his face, thanking him silently for 42 years of love and partnership. They buried him on the plateau overlooking the ranch, in a spot where he could see the sunset every evening for eternity. The funeral brought together family and friends from across the Southwest, all of them paying respects to a man who had been known for his fairness, his skill with horses, and his unwavering devotion to his wife. Eleanor stood at the graveside surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and she did not cry. She had done her crying in private, in the bedroom they had shared for so many years. Now she stood straight and strong, a 61-year-old woman who had survived worse losses and knew she would survive this one too, even though it felt like her heart had been cut from her chest. "He loved you so much," Sarah whispered, holding her mother's hand. "Everyone could see it, the way he looked at you, like you were the only person in the world that mattered. He made me feel that way from the first moment we met," Eleanor said quietly. "I spent my whole childhood and youth being told I was not enough, not pretty enough, not worthy enough. And then Nathan Kane looked at me and told me I was beautiful. He never stopped seeing me that way, never stopped making me believe it." She stayed at the ranch, refusing suggestions from well-meaning children that she move to town or come live with one of them. The ranch was her home, the place where she and Nathan had built their life together. She could feel his presence in every board of the house they had raised, in every tree in the garden they had planted, in the view from the porch where they had watched thousands of sunsets together. Eleanor lived another 12 years after Nathan's death, remaining active and engaged with the ranch and her family. She saw more grandchildren born and celebrated their milestones. She taught the girls how to grow vegetables in the desert and shared stories with the boys about their grandfather's skill with horses. She became the family matriarch, the one everyone turned to for advice and perspective. She never remarried, never even considered it. Nathan had been the love of her life, the person who had seen her truly and loved her completely. No one else could ever fill that space. On a warm evening in May of 1932, 73-year-old Eleanor Kane sat on her porch watching another sunset paint the sky in shades of red and gold. Her great-granddaughter Eleanor, now a beautiful young woman of 20 with her grandmother's red hair and freckles, sat beside her. "Tell me again about grandfather," young Eleanor asked. "About how you met." So Eleanor told the story one more time, about the runaway wagon and the cowboy who fired a warning shot, about gathering vegetables in the dusty street and looking up to meet kind eyes, about the simple words that had changed everything. "You look like a sunset." He really said that. Just like that, just like that. I thought he was making fun of me at first. Everyone always made fun of my hair and freckles. But he meant it. He looked at me and saw beauty where I had only seen flaws. Young Eleanor touched her own red hair, inherited from the grandmother she was named for. "I am glad I look like you, glad I got your hair and your freckles. You should be glad. You are beautiful inside and out. Never let anyone tell you differently." Eleanor took her great-granddaughter's hand. "That is what your great-grandfather taught me. That beauty is not about matching some narrow standard. It is about being seen for who you really are, being valued for your true self. I hope I find someone who sees me that way someday. You will. And when you do, do not let fear stop you from reaching for it. Take the chance, even when it seems scary. Even when practical people tell you to play it safe. Some things are worth the risk." They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky blazing with color. Eleanor felt peaceful, content, ready for whatever came next. She had lived a full life, loved deeply and been loved in return. She had built something lasting with Nathan, something that would continue in their children and grandchildren long after she was gone. That night, Eleanor Kane died in her sleep, slipping away as gently as Nathan had 12 years before. Her family found her in the morning, lying peacefully in the bed she had once shared with her husband, a slight smile on her face as if she had seen something wonderful in her dreams. They buried her beside Nathan on the plateau, united in death as they had been in life. The headstone was simple, just their names and dates, and underneath, "She looked like a sunset. He looked like home." The ranch continued under the management of their descendants, who honored Nathan and Eleanor's legacy by treating their employees fairly and running the operation with integrity. The house they had built was carefully maintained, becoming a gathering place for family celebrations and holiday dinners. The stories of how it all began were passed down through generations, keeping alive the memory of a cowboy who saw beauty where others saw flaws, and a woman who was brave enough to believe him. And every evening, as the Arizona sun set over the valley, painting the sky in those familiar shades of red and gold and copper, the Kane family would pause in their work and watch, remembering the love story that had started with those simple words. "You look like a sunset."